Welcome back. Fade to Black. I am your host, Jimmy Church. Tonight, Michael Schratt is here. Got a lot of stuff we're going to be going over tonight, and I think I have it in order. Of course, the one case that we wanted to start off with tonight seems to have vanished. Just had it in my hand. All right, let's get this show cracking. Tomorrow night, Barry Littleton. Great guy, an amazing abduction and contact case that he has been going through his entire life. And so we'll be talking about that tomorrow and his recent contact and conversation. So that will be tomorrow night. Thursday night is another Fader night with open lines all night long. Tonight it's Michael Schratt. And I did post up on Twitter over the weekend. Michael and I got together for a nice little clandestine meeting at a location here in Burbank and went over all of the material in advance for tonight's show. And he is a private pilot. He's a military aerospace historian. He has lectured across the country on the unique subject of mystery aircraft and classified propulsion systems buried deep within the military-industrial complex. He was a guest speaker at the Oshkosh Air Venture in 2006 and 2007, world's largest air show, and he has developed a number of contacts which have had firsthand experience in dealing with classified black programs, including former United States Air Force pilots, retired naval personnel, aerospace engineers, and has been that have maintained a top secret SCI security clearance. In an effort to expose government fraud, waste, and abuse, Michael devotes much of his free time researching aerospace technical documents, conducting interviews, and traveling to multiple university archives. As a concerned citizen, it's his belief that it is our constitutional obligation to question authority and demand an accounting of unacknowledged special access programs that bypass congressional oversight and public scrutiny. You can follow him on Facebook, Michael Schratt. It's right there. We have the links up at jimmychurchradio.com. I'd like to welcome back to Fade to Black, Michael Schratt. Michael, good evening. How are you?
Jimmy, great to be with you.
It's great to hear your voice again. And, you know, it's funny. We're going to be going over all of this material tonight. And we were talking about Have Blue earlier.
Right.
And I've got everything organized. The Have Blue image, I've misplaced it. And I can't.
Okay.
I've gone through. I had it while I was sitting here. Oh, is it on the floor? What did I do? I don't know. Okay.
It's okay, Jimmy, we can roll with it now.
Yeah, I know, right? And but before we get to that, and I have a Project Blue Book file here. Thank you for that I've now read through a few times. This is some of the most fascinating reading, and I know that I'm holding something historical, you know, in my hands. And when you read through stuff like this, it just makes me more appreciative of the work that you do. And thank you for getting me this copy of this Blue Book file. But
no
this is what I wanted to ask you first.
Yep.
The TV show, Project Blue Book, where you have had, well, I hate to say it, but special access, right? You had your own special access program into the Blue Book files. And you have looked and pored over and documented so many of those cases. And then this show comes out. It's entertaining. I get that on History Channel. When you see that versus what you know about your research into Hynek and what Blue Book was all about, what went through your mind when watching the series?
Good question, Jimmy. Again, good to be with you tonight. One thing I want to clarify is I didn't technically have any impact on the TV show, but as you mentioned, yes, I did look into the Blue Book files that were a part of QFOS, Center for UFO Studies. That was 2457 West Peterson Avenue, and that's where I went through. It had to have been about 30,000 cases, and within those were a number of Blue Book files.
And like I said, What were your thoughts when watching the TV show?
Okay. Well, obviously, they fictionalized a lot of this, and I think they missed some very good cases. I would say 25% of that series was gripping. The other 75%, I felt they lost their way, and maybe they could have done a good job. But it's a first pass. They're going to do another season. Not bad all in all for a first pass, although a lot of these kind of veered off the historical track. I wish they were going to cover the one that we're going to cover tonight, because that would have been great.
Yes. This is an amazing case that we're going to cover. Everything that we're going to talk about tonight is unbelievably cool. But where I thought, freedom in writing and creativity, okay, we should always encourage that. But right. When we are told from the beginning of each episode that this is based on actual events, and, this is a United States government project, the United States Air Force and Project Blue Book, that all of this is part of the record, and this is how it went down. And then the creativity takes things into Hynek and abductions and running right. into tanks with, liquid tanks with ET bodies in them. And putting him on a plane that crashed, things like that, which none of that happened, but it's telling the public that it did. And those that don't know the actual facts of all of these cases and the timelines of them, bringing in Men in Black all the way back in the late 1940s, 1950 is just wrong. Did any of that happen? Did Hynek ever have contact with aliens? Did he ever Men in Black, Russian agents living next door and sleeping with his wife? Things like that. That's crazy, right. Crazy things.
I didn't see any evidence of that going through the QFOS files, and there were a number of files sent directly to J. Allen Hynek before he passed away and after he passed away. So that was, kind of a post and pre-application of letters that were sent to the QFOS headquarters.
And is it okay for History Channel to have this kind of fictional freedom with a man's past and his life?
I've debated it, Jimmy. I just don't know if they should sensationalize the cases. Part of me says that, they should stick to the historical background, and then probably for ratings, they wanted to divert a little bit to maybe sensationalize it and get more interest in the series. Maybe that's what they did, and they felt that they could reach a balance. Looks like that's what they did.
Well, the cases, if they just stayed, on point,
right,
the cases stand on their own.
They probably can. Yes, they probably can.
And I agree with you too as well. The stuff that they did were the more popular ones, but they weren't the best ones, right? And so I don't know.
What can you really make out of a 45-minute slot in prime time out of just a CE1 case where someone just sees a light? I mean, how do you build a 1-hour TV program out of a CE1 light sighting? You can't do it. You've got to add something to it.
Well, that and the Flatwoods Monster case, which, right. Again, if we just go based on all of the actual eyewitnesses that were there and just go off of their side of things, because they were the ones that were there, and not turn it into an owl standing on the top of a tree.
Well, yeah. I spoke to Frank Ficino about that, and I don't think he was very happy, because I don't even know if they really pursued his line of research. There is no one on this planet, point blank, that has done more research on a Flatwoods Monster case than Frank Ficino.
That's right.
No one has done the amount of research that he has done. And I worked with him for quite a while. We put together a really nice SolidWorks model. I did a 3D printout of this thing. They could have used something like that and got very close to what that thing actually looked like. But in the TV series, completely different.
Yeah, it was. That was one of the episodes I was most looking forward to. Right. And it was strange how they chose to debunk the case instead of going in the other direction, and which they could have done with other cases, but they didn't. And like what they did with the Lubbock Lights as well, completely destroyed what was and still is just an absolute fascinating case. And they killed it. They killed it off. And they went the debunking route instead of sticking with the facts in the case. Oh, I found the Have Blue. Okay. All right. I found the Have Blue. I can now relax. We've got a lot to discuss tonight.
Okay.
And we're going to start off with Have Blue. And briefly, tell us what Have Blue was.
Yeah. Okay. Good, Jimmy. Let's go ahead and start here. I want to start by setting the stage. I think we should set a historical precedent of what we're talking about here so that we can build on a foundation. And this really begins in 1973, Jimmy, during the Yom Kippur Air War of October 14th, 1973, when a number of Israeli pilots flying American fighters were shot down. So that's the first thing to remember. Is the Yom Kippur Air War, October 14th, 1973. Now, concurrent with that, Jimmy, something else was going on. Soviet Tall King radars and SA-2 and SA-4 sites were coming online. So when you put these in conjunction to each other, these two separate items coming together as a united coalition, it was at that time that the U.S. Air Force pretty much saw the writing on the wall that we could no longer penetrate Russian airspace safely. We had to do something about it. And that's what spurred this whole stealth program. So it was in 1974 that the U.S. Air Force approached DARPA, and they wanted to examine the feasibility of developing a low radar cross-section manned aircraft that could sneak in under the radar screen, hit a target, and come out completely unscathed, unannounced. And so that's the historical background of where we're starting here. Now, keep going forward. What they ended up doing is putting on a request for proposal. There were at least 6 to 7 contractors that answered the call from DARPA. That includes Boeing, General Dynamics, McDonnell Douglas, Grumman, Northrop, Fairchild, and Republic. And interestingly, Jimmy, Lockheed they weren't included on this original group because they hadn't built a fighter since the F-104. So they weren't even included on the stealth program. I always thought that was interesting. And they actually pulled Kelly Johnson out of retirement, and he worked with Ben Rich to develop Have Blue, and that was the working prototype that led to the development of the F-117A stealth fighter. Continuing on, Dennis Overholzer was the engineer at Lockheed Skunk Works. He took 6 weeks to develop the Echo 1 program, and that led to the Hopeless Diamond, or the faceted flat plate technology. And what we want to keep in mind, too, is when you talk about stealth technology, Jimmy, we've got 2 approaches. We've got the prismatic approach, which is the faceted flat plate technology, aka Lockheed Have Blue program. And then we've got the smooth contouring, also known as the continuous curvature, found in the B-2 stealth bomber. And interesting to note that after the F-117, Jimmy, we really don't see any more of these faceted flat plate stealth aircraft anymore because they did away with it. They're on second, third generation stealth aircraft now, and they've gone to complete continuous curvature. And the radar cross signature of the B-2 is significantly lower than the F-117, even though it's larger. So when you talk about stealth technology, it's not size that matters, it's shape that matters, Jimmy.
Right. And yep. Have Blue, which when it flew, and the original photographs of it, looked fairly close to the final version of the 117.
Kind of, yeah. Mm-hmm.
It did.
One other thing to consider is, now let's just put this in an example term here. If you have an F-15 on a radar screen, the RCS of an F-15 head-on is 10 square meters. And I got this from Alan Brown. I talked to him for many hours. We discussed this. This is interesting, Jimmy. In order to be effective, in order to really be an effective stealth aircraft, you have to drop that factor down by a factor of 10,000. So you've got to go from 10 square meters all the way down to an eagle's eyeball,
Right.
or even less. It could be a BB.
Right.
And even in Ben Rich's book, Skunk Works, in order to sell the stealth program to the Pentagon brass in Washington at the Pentagon, basically he took out these small ball bearings and rolled them across the table to the high-level military brass and said, there's the RCS of your aircraft. And that's how he sold the program.
So here we have an illustration, a picture of Have Blue being buried at Area 51.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, this is Have Blue. First flight was December 1st, 1977 at Area 51. Basically, we've got Ben Rich there, who's the father of the stealth fighter, and then Kelly Johnson was there as well. And when this thing took off, Kelly turned around and patted Ben on the back, and he said, Ben, you got your first aircraft. And so that was December 1st, 1977. Now, Have Blue, serial number HB1001, crashed at Groom Lake on May 70. When he was approaching landing, this is Bill Parker, who was the test pilot, this aircraft did a sudden tip up, and it hit the main landing gear. So he came around, and he basically came around for a second pass on approach to landing, and he tried to bring the landing gear down, but only one main landing gear and one nose gear came down. The other main landing gear did not come down. And keep in mind, he's losing fuel rapidly. We have to make a decision. So the decision was he would climb to altitude. He punched out. It destroyed Have Blue, basically. And then Bill Park was severely injured in that incident. And that's the point where Have Blue later on was buried at Groom Lake, along with a number of other classified aircraft as well. So we've just got one example of birds that, after they've served their time or after they've crashed, in many cases, they're buried at the test site, never to be seen again, Jimmy.
So there's I've seen pictures of it, of the graveyard there at Groom Lake, and they bury and they burn, right? Don't they burn these too as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. During the F-117 program, there were 2 tractor trailers that came to Burbank twice a week and loaded up with 55-gallon drums of epoxies, resins, toxic materials, radar-absorbent materials, and went all the way from Burbank to Groom Lake. That's a long drive, 2 of these things. And then they had these large trenches at Groom Lake, which are located directly adjacent to the housing area at Groom Lake as well. So they would offload these toxic materials in these 55-gallon drums into these massive deep burn pits, and then they would pour diesel fuel into the burn pits and then light a torch, throw it into the pits, and the whole thing would go up in flames, and all this black acrid smoke would start basically going over the residential area. And then that's what's caused all the OSHA type implementations, where there were lawsuits, and many of the Area 51 workers, their skin started peeling off in scales, and there were many lawsuits that to this day have not even been solved. So
yeah,
that's what happened there.
It blows my mind that all of this went down to Burbank, and the Lockheed's credit union is still there. It's right across the street from Burbank Airport, and I was a member of that credit union for a minute, and but it's the Skunk Works Credit Union, right? It's right there at the entrance of Burbank Airport. And that it's the last reminder to everybody about the footprint that that Lockheed had right there in Burbank. All right, before we get to the break, let's go on to the SR-71 drone accident.
Right.
I'm going to hold this up. What are we looking at here? Where did this happen?
Okay. So when we talk about the Blackbird, we should talk about the different variants. So first of all, you've got the A-12, which was the single-seat CIA reconnaissance aircraft. You've got something called the YF-12, which was an interceptor that actually never made it into production, full-scale production. You've also got the M21 D21 tag board program, which was a mothership, daughtership parasitic aircraft. And then you've got the SR-71, which the Air Force two-seater. So they stretched out the A-12 to employ a second seat. So there's actually 4 variants of the Blackbird. Now, the incident that we're talking about here, this took place July 30th, 1966, at altitude off the coast of San Diego. And basically, they're going to launch this parasitic drone off the back of the M51 at altitude. And when they launched this thing, immediately, it seemed like everything was okay. But for some strange reason, the D-21 drone got caught into the shockwave of the M21, and it pitched to the left, Jimmy, and pitched down and hit basically station 715, where the wing root meets the fuselage, exactly where the delta wing begins from the tapering portion of the chine section. And it split the aircraft in two, Jimmy. And Bill Park, he was the test pilot, and he said that when I saw pieces flying ahead of me, I knew I had a problem. So you can imagine all this debris and all these pieces of shrapnel and mechanical parts were flying ahead of him. And he's in this Mach 3 aircraft, and he's got debris flying ahead of him. So he knew something was going on. So he punched out, but Ray Torek, he drowned. He did not survive the incident. And that's essentially the M21 D21 incident. It's a historic event. It's actually never been illustrated. And I want to give credit to my illustrator friend, Tom Bogan, for doing these illustrations.
Yeah, Tom is incredible.
Yep. Preserving an important part of our national history.
Absolutely. The D21, which is here, was, as far as I know, was the first stealth drone, and that's the way that this was designed. And they needed, they didn't know if the SR-71 was going to make it across China or Russia anymore. And they didn't want to risk pilots' lives. So they devised this idea to have a drone fly at these speeds. It looked remarkably like a miniature SR-71.
Yes, it does.
I've seen it in person. I've photographed myself next to it up in Seattle at the Boeing Museum up there, and it's a pretty incredible. And it's not very big. It looks big. The SR-71 isn't even that big when you stand up next to it. But the drone and this idea that they had all the way back into the 70s is pretty crazy to me. We were making leaps and leaps in technology. Pretty incredible. So this was off the coast of San Diego.
That's correct. That is correct.
Absolutely incredible. Okay, when we come back after the break, which we're going to do here in 30 seconds, we're going to discuss one of my favorite planes, another one that I've seen multiple times in person, which is the Valkyrie, the V-70, which is right here. We'll be discussing this when we come back. Our guest tonight, Michael Schratt. And like Michael said, all of this is building the foundation to some pretty incredible stuff that we are going to be discussing in a little bit when it comes to UFOs. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. This is Fade to Black on the Game Changer Network and KGRA The Planet. More with Mr. Schratt after this short break. Stay with us. You're listening to a preview of Fade to Black. To get the full episode, go to jimmychurchradio.com and get our podcast. Click on the podcast banner or sign up in the membership area for downloadable MP3s. Everything commercial free. Welcome back. Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Michael Schratt. Now, for those of you out there, all of these images and documents I am holding up to the bunker cam for all of you in the member area looking at this live on video. And Kevin and others, but Kevin is also posting pictures up on Twitter of the bunker cam. Thank you for that, Kevin. That's very cool of you to take the time to do that. Michael, let's get straight back to it. We've got too much to cover. The XB-70, which, again, is one of my... I've got a few favorite planes. I do. We all do, right? XB-70 is right there. I still love the B-58 Hustler, one of the coolest planes ever. The F-104. The F-104, to me, hands down, sexiest plane ever designed. X-15, yes. Yes. I love my planes. But the Valkyrie, there's something about this plane that is not only sexy, but it looks way too advanced. And to think about when it was designed and when it flew, I thought that we were heading straight into the space age with this plane. And then we have this, the XB-70 Valkyrie crash. How many were built? 2, right? Just 2?
Only 2, but then the extrusions for air vehicle number 3 were produced but never built. Right.
Yeah, you're a historian. You know these things. So the one remaining Valkyrie is at Wright Pat in Cincinnati, in Dayton, Ohio.
Yes, correct.
And then we have this accident. What happened here?
Okay. Before we go into that, I want to hit 3 quotes by Ben that we've kind of reviewed, but just to set that up, and then we're going to hit the aircraft. So just really quickly, going back to Ben Rich, and I think we know that he was head of Skunk Works between 1975 to 1991. He made an interesting statement on September 7th, 1988. This is at the AIAA meeting in Atlanta, Georgia. Here he says, quote, "I wish I could tell you about the projects we are currently working on. They are both fascinating and fantastic. They call for technologies once only dreamed of by science fiction writers." So it's like pregnant with possibilities. What is Ben alluding to?
Right.
What could they be doing, right? And then, Jim, the other 2 people we're talking about here, he made another statement on March 23rd, 1993 at the UCLA Alumni Club, where he gave another lecture. This is 2 years prior to his passing in 1995. Tom Keller was there and Jan Harzen. They both confirmed that Ben Rich said the following statement, quote, "Anything you can imagine the Skunk Works can do or has already done." Okay? So I thought that was interesting. And then finally, just before Ben passed away in 1995, he got in a final conversation phone call with my good friend Jim Goodall. And Ben Rich told Jim Goodall over the phone, he said, "Jim, we have things in the Nevada desert that are 50 years beyond what you can comprehend. If you've seen it on Star Wars or Star Trek, we've been there, done that, or decided it wasn't worth the effort."
That's right.
Coming directly from Ben Rich.
That's right. And his other famous quote, we have the technology to take ET home.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
I'm paraphrasing.
Nope,
but
that's right.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Okay, Valkyrie XB-70.
You want to do the Valkyrie. Okay. So that's a little bit out of order, but that's okay.
It is? Are we out of order?
Well, we have the list. The next one on the list is George Air Force Base.
There it is, right there. Okay.
Yep, George Air Force. Okay, so this is a letter that I received from John Andrews. The John Andrews collection was donated to my historical archives back in 2013. John Andrews, for anyone who doesn't know, was the senior project design engineer Testers Model Corporation, San Diego. He was the one that designed the low observable stealth aircraft prior to the F-117 being acknowledged by the Air Force on November the 10th of 1988. So he's the one who started the whole hurrah about stealth aircraft, and the F-19 was in there as well, but John Andrews was the original interceptor that started the black aircraft research. So I've got a letter here from John Andrews to Ben Rich, and this is dated August 14th, 1981. So this is really early on, even in the stealth program. Says, "Ben Rich, your crew responsible for 2 very strange birds leaving at dawn just at first light from George Air Force Base near Victorville, California. One white, one gray, said to be very Lippish-like, Alexander Lippish flying wing. Good acceleration, good climb. Don't loiter around George and not seen for rest of day. Attached sketch may or may not be accurate. Could it be Code 85 birds might be into a base as relatively open as George Air Force Base? Could it be that would be the last place eyes from other side would look for them? Could it be that's why they are there? Regards, John Andrews. So talking about an Alexander Lippisch flying wing craft, it looks like two of these departed, according to John Andrews' sketch. Now you have the full color illustration.
Yeah, I'm holding up
off of the original sketch.
I've got the original sketch here. I'm holding it up. There it is.
Yep.
And then the illustration of these two above George Air Force Base. And that's, there you go. Incredible.
Yep. Jim Goodall was aware of it as well. So what we're looking at here is a single pilot, kind of a blended wing, flying wing configuration with a vertical stabilizer, which would have definitely increased the RCS, no doubt about it. Like in the F-117, you've got the twin outward canted vertical stabilizers. Here, you've got a vertical coming straight up. So that would have definitely bumped up the RCS. Then you've got an air intake on either side of the center line of the aircraft, winglets coming down, and then engine inlets that are buried within the fuselage itself or the top portion of the wing. And then the exhaust ports are kind of set aft of the trailing edge, very similar to how they are on the B-2 to reduce the infrared signature so that a SAM sight below could not hit that part. So kind of an early concept. That's all, Jimmy, we have on this. Very little, slightly vague information, but it could be one of these birds that is still lurking out there today.
Yeah, incredible illustration. And the illustration does take it to the next level. But the original sketch, which I'm going to hold up again, that just makes my hair stand up. That's pretty incredible. That's pretty incredible.
Yep.
That's pretty incredible stuff. Okay. Next is what's
the
next?
Accelerator.
The Accelerator.
The Accelerator. Okay, now credit has to go to the Bill Scott collection for this. Former Rocky Mountain editor of Aviation Week Space Technology, who is another black aircraft researcher, was basically in it for his entire career, and was given access to the Bill Scott collection. So I got to give credit to Bill Scott. Now, all we have here is one rough pencil sketch,
which I'm holding up to the cameras now,
and then two.
Okay. Well, before we get there, the original pencil sketch, which is here, says Groom Lake, 1994, hypersonic interceptor, KJTH, 150 feet, Mach 14. That is what is on here. Is the original sketch. Yep. Look at that. That is absolutely incredible. And it says Groom Lake, 1994. And you can see all of the writing underneath. But now I'm going to hold it still for the camera. Okay.
Now, when you look on the title of this bird, what is it called, Jimmy? We just talked about. What is this bird called?
Accelerator.
Accelerator, right?
Yep.
Okay. Now, within the black community, they give these birds nicknames, okay? There's one called the Zipper, there's one called the Accelerator, and it just goes on and on. They actually give these birds nicknames. So a key to what this thing does is within the nickname itself. And look at the configuration, Jimmy. We've got a large blended wing, 75-degree swept wing configuration, with what looks like scramjet intakes on the bottom. This thing may actually have solid billet aluminum wheels because approach to landing would be very high on this thing. It'd have a high landing speed. So if you look at this, Jimmy, this looks a whole lot like the NASP program, the X-30, the National Air and Space Program. And just after the Challenger explosion on January 28th, 1986, President Reagan actually had to delay his State of the Union address. This is reported in New York Times, February 5th, 1986. And this is Ronald Reagan speaking here. Ronald Reagan, State of the Union address, 1986. He said, we, quote, "We are going forward with research on a new Orient Express that could, by the end of the next decade, take off from Dulles Airport and accelerate up to 25 times the speed of sound, attaining low Earth orbit or flying to Tokyo within 2 hours," according to Ronald Reagan. Okay, and why is this important? Because even President Reagan talks about how this thing is going to accelerate out to 25 times the speed of sound. That's exactly what the NASA program was all about. And you can't do that on conventional technology, Jimmy, because remember, this thing has to taxi out of the hangar and then go onto the tarmac and then go on to the active runway at Groom Lake. So we're looking, Jimmy, at a combined cycle scramjet propulsion system. And this is totally consistent with what we know about either manned or unmanned reconnaissance aircraft, because when the SR-71 was retired in 1990, a lot of people said that satellites could do the job. This is 1990. Satellites could do the job. We no longer need the Blackbird, but that's not entirely correct, because number one, satellites have predictable orbits. Number two, once they run out of fuel, they're paperweights, Jimmy. They're absolute paperweights. They're useless. So by default, we need either a manned or unmanned hypersonic aircraft that works in conjunction with the satellites. And this thing, this bird, whatever it is, could look a lot like this NASA program or the Accelerator. It has to be anywhere in the world in less than 2 hours, exactly what Ronald Reagan is talking about right here.
Yeah, incredible. Yep. Absolutely incredible. Next.
Okay, next on the list. Okay. So we're going to move over to our United 934. And we've got some good documentation.
Yeah, this is pretty mind blowing. And
yeah, I like this one a lot.
Yeah, the documentation takes it to a whole nother level. Okay,
Yep.
Go ahead, take off.
Go ahead. Okay, reference material, just so that people don't think I'm making this up. You can verify it for yourself. This is August 24th, 1992. Aviation Week Space Technology, and also the News Tribune, September 5th, 1992. That's the reference material for this. This is also News Tribune, Tacoma, Washington, September 5th, 1992. Subheading, Flight of Mystery Plane leaves many questions for Pentagon to answer. And then on the AvWeek article, the subtitle is United 747 crew reports near collision with mysterious supersonic aircraft. So bottom line here, Jimmy, is you've got a 747 Heavy taking off from LAX. It's heading to London's Heathrow Airport, taking up a magnetic 40-degree heading. This is August 5th, 1992, when this actually took place. They're at 23,000 feet, Jimmy, and then all of a sudden, some type of a mysterious bird comes screaming under the 747, and they estimate pilot and co-pilot got an 8 to 10 second sighting. It was a long duration sighting. 8 to 10 seconds, that's a long duration. Between 500 and 1,000 feet below the 747, and they believed it was going supersonic. It was their assessment, pilot, co-pilot, that this bird was going supersonic.
Now, I'm going to hold up to the camera really quick. Yep. I've got two sketches, and these are from the pilots.
We believe these are from John Andrews, sent to the Bill Scott collection.
Got it. And This is number one. Going to hold this up, and with a complete description on what was witnessed, all handwritten. There's that. And then this top view.
Correct.
Which is just mind-blowing. I don't even know what to make of this, but that's... That's
what they described, Jimmy,
incredible.
is a blended lifting body configuration that looked like the forward part of an SR-71 Blackbird. It had an X-15 splitter single canopy near the front. There was an air intake on either side of the center line, and then twin inward canted vertical stabilizers on this bird. And that's essentially, and this happened near George Air Force Base, just like the other two aircraft that we talked about that looked like Lippish. So they could have been testing something from George Air Force Base, or it could have escaped Edwards Flight Test Center as well.
Now, so here I've got your illustrations done by your artist, and there's the 747 United Heavy with this little guy cruising right underneath the plane.
That's correct.
It's there, and then here is a view, pilot's view from inside of the cockpit. Imagine you're a pilot, right? Imagine seeing that.
I think it's exciting. To this day, Jimmy, this sighting has not been explained. And what I thought was interesting is United Airlines, they published this sighting in their internal company newsletter. So we know it's legit. 3 separate sources, no doubt.
Yeah, pretty incredible. Pretty incredible. Anytime, and I've done this a few times in my life, where I've been able in a private plane, sat in the co-pilot seat and flew the plane and goofed around and sat up there for a few hours, right?
Sure.
Praying to the good Lord above that I would have a sighting, right? I mean, if I was going to have one, I want to have one right then. And I'm always quizzing the pilot. Have you ever seen anything? I mean, I've had a couple of strange stories, but I've been waiting for something like that. So there you go. Okay, next up, that is one of the most incredible documented sightings like ever. And okay, so now the XB-70.
Okay, XB-70. Okay, the date on this is June 8th, 1966. We've got a 5-ship formation. The XB-70 was in the lead. We also had an F-4 Phantom, an F-5, a T-38, and an F-104. So it's a 5-ship formation. They were on a photo flight. The F-104 was off the right wingtip of the XB-70. And for some reason, Jimmy, we don't know exactly why, the F-104 drifted to the left, and it clipped the right wingtip of the XB-70. Immediately after that, this thing flipped up inverted, struck the back of the XB-70, shearing off both vertical stabilizers. Pilot Joe Walker was killed basically instantly. And then the XB-70 went into an uncontrolled spin and crashed. The co-pilot, Carl Cross, was killed. Al White, he injured his arm when the clamshell crew egress system crushed his arm, but he survived. And that's essentially the XB-70 crash. And to me, Jimmy, this aircraft represents the most inspiring bird out there. I mean, it's one-on-one with the SR-71, but this one might be even more inspiring.
I know. It's absolutely incredible. You see it in person.
Yeah.
And you just get a lump in your throat. I mean, it is the most incredible looking plane ever. And then, of course, the F-104, which is, I think the sexiest plane ever designed and ever flown, but it was also notoriously unstable.
Well, the F-104 was called the Missile with the Man in it, and it was also called the Widowmaker.
The Widowmaker.
The approach to landing is very high. I mean, it's got such a short wingspan that the landing speed is very high. So you got to be a good pilot. You have to have power all the way down to the runway. You don't just throttle back and then flare this thing in.
What is? I remember the first time that I saw an F-104 in person. Right. And I looked at it and went, those wings, I had no idea. They looked like I could fold them up and stick them in my pocket. They were just so tiny. What was the wingspan on? Wingspan was 20 feet. 20 feet. 20 feet. 20 feet, people. That's with the fuselage in the middle. So that's telling me that each wing was probably 7 feet. The length of a body. Yeah, you could lay down on the ground, and that's the size of the wing, maybe 8 feet. That's incredible. That's absolutely, yeah. So if it's 8 feet, right, 8 and 8, 16, that would leave you 4 feet of fuselage in the middle. That's how tiny the F-104 was. Wingspan, 20 feet.
You can see Kelly Johnson's handiwork in this aircraft. Everything that Kelly Johnson did was aesthetically pleasing. He really didn't design anything that wasn't pretty, you can say. They all had this certain Kelly Johnson look. Just incredible. There has never been another engineer like Kelly Johnson. Burt Rutan is very comparable. He may actually be better because he's designed kind of a more rounded grouping of aircraft, high-speed aircraft, low-speed aircraft, some stealth aircraft. So maybe Bert's better, but they're very close to each other.
Now, when we come back after the break, let's go ahead and set this up.
Yep.
We are going to discuss the Aztec New Mexico UFO, which was after Roswell, right? Tell us about Aztec. Correct. Set it up.
Okay. You want to roll with that? Okay. So the date on this is March 25th, 1948, after the Roswell incident. Primary sources of information are William Steinman, who was the original researcher along with Wendell Stevens. So they were kind of the primary researchers. Now, they wrote a book called UFO Crash at Aztec, which is 500 to 600 pages long. It's a very kind of a dry, wordy read. I don't even think a lot of people read that book.
Oh, I read that book. I still have that book.
Yep. It's a very thick book. It's very wordy, and it's not a concise book. But the other researchers that have to get credit are Scott and Suzanne Ramsey. They've done everything that William Steinman did and took it to the next level and made it modern. And they've got 25 years of research, over 50,000 documents pertaining to the Aztec New Mexico UFO crash retrieval. So in their minds, it's 100% legit. They've talked to the surviving eyewitnesses. They interviewed them. They went to research historical archives and pulled up the data, all the original documentation. Bottom line, Jimmy, here's what we're dealing with. We've got a 99.9-foot diameter dish-shaped craft that crash landed 12.5 miles northeast of Aztec, New Mexico. I mean, literally just a fraction shorter than 100 feet in diameter. The craft had an upper dome and a lower dome. The lower dome was smaller in diameter than the upper dome. Around the outside circumference of the upper dome, there were 6 16-inch diameter round-shaped portholes that had a mirrored glass finish, just like Michael Jackson's glasses.
Now, so before we get into that, because that's not what's important here about there's a reason for this, everybody. So we're going to get to that in a second, and I've got to head to break in about 60 seconds. So let me hold up to the camera. There it is, 99 feet around. These are the portals here. This is the dome that he's talking about on the top. When we come back after the break, we're going to be talking about, you can see some men, which are oil workers. We'll discuss that in a second. But they go up to one of the portals, and it's what they discover there, and then what happened to the craft. Now, but the other point about this, some call it a crash. We've definitely have retrieval, but you are saying that this may not have been a crash as much as it was a landing.
Yeah, well, in the Kingman UFO quote-unquote crash retrieval, according to Harry Drew, it was a soft landing. But in this one, we could somewhat call it a crash. It's sort of a slight soft landing as well, but it did embed itself slightly in the soil, and we can talk about what happened on one of the windows when we got back.
Yeah. We'll do that when we come back. Yeah, this is absolutely incredible. The Aztec New Mexico case, because of Scott and Susan Ramsey and their recent research and book, is turning out to be one of the most incredible cases in UFO history right here, and they have done some excellent work to continue to investigate this. And you're right about Wendell Stevens and all of his work in the past. I miss him so much. Let's take a break right here. This is Fade to Black. I'm your host, Jimmy Church. Our guest tonight, Michael Schratt, discussing all of these cases, and we'll continue with the Aztec New Mexico UFO crash, soft landing, and retrieval when we come back. Stay with us. You have just listened to a full hour free preview of Fade to Black. To get the full show, all archives, just go to our podcast section at jimmychurchradio.com. You can also sign up to be a Fadernaut in our membership area, where we have downloadable MP3s. Go to jimmychurchradio.com. Go Bagley Tappy.